Italian Football Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Italian Football Podcast, the official podcast of Football Italia. I'm not Carlo Garganese, as you can see. My name's Nima, and I'm joined today by a very good friend of the show. He's the lead Serie A World Feed commentator in English, Mr. Patrick Kendrick, covering in for Carlo, who couldn't be due to some recovering from a minor operation, which I'm sure he'll be delighted to tell you all about once he's back. But before we get to all of that, on today's show, we will be reacting to the weekend Serie A action, where Napoli took a big step towards the Scudetto. Scott McTominay is once again the hero in the win over Torino. Inter could go from a possible treble to Zeru Tituli after losing their third game in a row at home after Matias Soulé inspired Roma to a win. Roma's fantastic form continues. Atalanta dropped points at home to Lecce in a game that was overshadowed by a tragic death of the Lecce physiotherapist. We're going to be talking about that as well, and also the statement that Lecce put out. Juventus beat Monza, but an absolutely idiotic red card from Kenan Yildiz means he will now miss probably the decisive top four matches away against Bologna and Napoli for sure, but even more than that, and we'll be discussing whether or not that action also costs Juve the Champions League qualification. Milan completed what this season has been a rare positive week by beating Inter in the Coppa Italia and then Venezia. We'll also preview the Italy versus Spain European semi-finals as Inter travel to Barcelona in the Champions League and Fiorentina play Real Betis in the Conference League, and the usual Baggio, Premface and Serie ASS of the week. Also, a quick heads up for all Serie A fans in the UK and Ireland. You can stream every single Serie A match live on OneFootball. No matter which team you're backing, OneFootball's got you covered. You can watch via the OneFootball app on your phone or connected TVs from Apple TV, Google TV, Samsung, LG, and Fire TV, or on the website tv.onefootball. And what's even better is that you can choose how you watch. You can grab a team or a season pass to watch all the matches until the end of the season, or just the ones from your favorite club. There's also a match day pass for $9.99 to watch all the weekend's games, or a single match on pay-per-view for $4.99. And yes, if you missed a live game, you'll still get the access to all the match highlights too. So if Serie A is your thing, OneFootball is where it's at. We have a link in the description of the episode for you to buy your preferred stream. And for all our first-time listeners, this is our free weekly episode that we do every Monday, reviewing the weekend Serie A action and all the biggest talking points in Italian football. If you want to support the Italian Football Podcast and receive all of our content that we do throughout the week without any ads, including a weekly Q&A episode every Tuesday, where we answer all of our questions from our patrons, plus the weekly Thursday midweek review show, plus interviews, post-match reaction, and much more, then go to patreon.com/TIFP and become a subscriber for $3.99 a month plus VAT. And also now you can sign to be a paid subscriber on Spotify for the same price. Link in the description. You can also now watch us on YouTube, and you can also become a patron on YouTube via YouTube memberships. Go to the YouTube channel on youtube.com/@ItaFootPod for more details. And for all of you who listen on Spotify, Apple, iTunes podcasts, we'd really appreciate if you give us a 5-star rating and give us a follow and a like. And on YouTube, please do subscribe and like our content when you watch it. All of this really helps us grow and do more quality content for you guys. Right, let's get into today's show. So, Patrick, Napoli take a huge step towards the Scudetto. That's at least from where I'm standing. I want to talk about, before we get to all the different talking points, I do want to talk, and one talking point being Scott McTominay. Will he be the Serie A player of the season if Napoli are able to win the Scudetto? But before we get to that, I want to talk about the Scudetto situation. So Napoli are now 3 points clear of Inter. They got Lecce away, Genoa at home, Parma away, Cagliari away. They've got 3 wins in a row. They haven't conceded, but there is an injury situation. David Neres, Alessandro Buongiorno, and Andre Anguissa. Surely that was the end of the Scudetto race, no? Or what do you think?
I think if we'd learned anything this season, it's to expect the unexpected. I did the Napoli game yesterday. My co-commentator, shout out to Manuel Pascali, he actually said, we can't take anything for granted. And I think it was certainly the right sentiment there. He said that before kickoff. And my feeling was that if Napoli scored early, that they would comfortably win that game. And they did score early. I mean, inside 7 minutes, McTominay scoring again, 5 goals in 3 games, coming good at the right time. As for whether it's over, I have constantly looked at that fixture list and I see Napoli being very strong at the Maradona. The two issues that could potentially arise are those away games at Lecce and at Parma. And you know as well as I do that you can really compartmentalize a team's form from when they're in a relegation battle. A team's form for 30, 32, 34 match days goes out of the window, and suddenly the spectre of Serie B looms large and they've just find a new level. We've seen that so many times in previous years. And I think that will be the case with Lecce. And I know we'll get onto it, their game against Atalanta, the tragic death of Graziano Fiorita. They now have an extra reason to try and win that match against Napoli next week at the Via del Mare. It's already, I think they have the 7th or 8th highest average attendance. It's a terrific atmosphere. It's a great ground. They're not just going to roll over for Napoli to get 3 points there. So we shall see. I think it's that, and it's the Parma game. People have countered that by saying maybe Parma will already be safe by the time Napoli go to the Tardini matchday 37. However, matchday 37 is Parma's final home game of the season. And you know as well as I do, teams always want to win their last home game of the season. And Parma, they've beaten Milan at the Tardini. They've beaten Juventus at the Tardini. They drew with Inter. And at the moment, the problem I think for Inter is, had they drawn yesterday, and I know we'll get onto that because there was scope for a draw, had some officiating decisions panned out differently, but had Inter drawn yesterday, I think it would have been that much more doable because then you're relying on Napoli to draw a game and you can win your remaining matches. The issue now is Inter not only have to win all 4 of their remaining matches, which is by no means guaranteed given the way they're playing, but they also need Napoli to lose at least one. That's the bind.
It is, but we do know that the spareggio, I mean, that's also a possibility, which if Napoli were to...
Be still my beating heart.
I know you want that so badly, don't you? You really want that so badly. I don't. I think 64 matches for Inter a season is quite enough, as it is between the Champions League and all that. You know, even if they don't go through the final. But regardless, I mean, before we get to the actual Torino game, I want to pick your brain a little bit on that. I do want to talk a little bit about Scott McTominay. Look, we've discussed on the pod here, you know, did Man United make a mistake or not selling him? How much of it is Antonio Conte being once again able to get the best out of a player in a system? But leaving that aside for a moment, if Napoli win the Scudetto, I mean, I was tweeting out that he is the almost Scudetto for Napoli because I think Napoli are going to win the Scudetto. Surely, not only is the almost Scudetto, he's the MVP of the Serie A if Napoli win the Serie A.
I think so. I think it's very hard to give the MVP to a player who doesn't belong to the champion team. And if Napoli were to win the title, then suddenly you have to narrow down who are their most important players. And we know how important Stanislav Lobotka is, but he plays in that deep-lying playmaker role. And unless you're Hakan Çalhanoğlu with all of the Inter hype around you, you're not necessarily... that's a little dig for Nima in case anyone's wondering whether I have an agenda against Inter. I don't. That's just me winding up Nima for the first of a dozen times over the next however long this podcast lasts. No, I think Lobotka is Napoli's unsung hero, and he remains to be that. And I think he really is the continuity from the Spalletti side through to this Conte side. But what I would say is you're looking at Politano, Di Lorenzo, Lukaku, McTominay. It's those players really for me, the ones that have played week in, week out. Buongiorno's been injured. Zombongisa's been excellent as well. He's another possible candidate. But I think it's very close between Lukaku and McTominay now. You've got a dozen goals for Lukaku plus those 10 assists more than anyone else in Serie A. And McTominay's now up to 11 goals in Serie A. I think because of the impact, because he's new to the league, you would have to give it to McTominay in a very similar way to the way that Kvaratskhelia won the most valuable player when Napoli previously won the title. There was a lot of talk of Osimhen getting it. He finished as capocannoniere, and Kvicha was the MVP. So I think it's hard to look past him. The question remains, if Napoli weren't to win the Scudetto after this, if it's an Inter player, who would it be in that case? But I'll leave that one to you to ponder. If and when Inter get back into the title race. But I mean, I'm just amazed by McTominay and the stat that's doing the rounds. Of those 11 goals, 6 of them have been the opening goal in matches. So 6 times when the scoreline's been 0-0, he's broken the deadlock. And that's the hardest goal, especially for a team like Napoli that don't score many goals. That was always my concern when their form started to waver in the spring. It was, if Lukaku and McTominay stop scoring, and they did for a while, how are Napoli going to win matches? Well, McTominay started scoring again. They've won 3 in a row without conceding, and all of a sudden they're 3 clear.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much where I am as well. I mean, I still think that I think he has to be the MVP. If Napoli win the Scudetto, and given, like you said, the decisive goals, I think you can actually make a shout for Anguissa just because of how well he's played. But if we're talking just strict numbers, I mean, Lukaku and McTominay are the reason for this. I mean, 10 assists, 12 goals, yes, some penalties, but regardless, it's double figures, and you spread it out like that. And then you have McTominay, who, again, he scores important goals. And he scores these first goals, or like you said, and decisive goals. In Italy, you know, they talk about how many goals you score per firmare punti and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How many, so, and that he is definitely up there. So I think he has to be the MVP if Napoli win it, or when, I should say, Napoli win it. It won't be at Lecce. It won't be at Lecce.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, the reason I said that is partly also because the cinematic view of that. It's Italian football is nothing if not cinema, and Antonio Lecce returning to hometown. Antonio Conte returning to his hometown of Lecce against the fans who hate him because he left them for Bari. I mean, that would have been so cinematic, wouldn't it?
Well, you know, and again, that's another factor that will play into Lecce's motivation next Saturday as well. You mentioned Manchester United there, Nima. Can we not say that two things are true? Do we have to be so black and white?
No, we don't. We absolutely don't. I hate that.
I think it was the right move from him. He said that he was pigeonholed in a wrong position with Manchester United, playing in part of that double pivot 4-2-3-1 alongside Fred. He's always said, I'm a number 8. I'm a goal-scoring midfielder. That's always been my game. I'm not a defensive midfielder. And I think you're right. Conte's system is huge, because I was looking at the numbers yesterday. Zombongi has played 126 times in Serie A. He has 9 goals in the league. 6 of them have come this season. He had 3 Serie A goals in just under 100 appearances before this season. Conte comes in and he's trebled his output in terms of goals. So there's something to be said for that. And I think, the way they play with Lobotka sitting and those others given license to roam, and Lukaku spending so much of his game with his back to goal, and then players running beyond him. And how many times do we see Di Lorenzo make those runs and cut it back? Politano. I mean, that's been the one constant from the Scudetto side, if you think about it. Okay, Lozano played quite a few games. He and Politano sort of switched. But Di Lorenzo, Zombongi, Politano, all down the same side, all players that are in the Spalletti first Scudetto winning side, the 3rd Scudetto of Napoli's history, and could be part of a 4th one.
Absolutely. And I just want to talk about Antonio Conte briefly, because I know now that I have you here, I view, for me, I look at him winning. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that the Napoli have the best squad in the Serie A this season. Qualitatively on paper, that is. But the fact that he manages to, in the league, always get teams to deliver highly. I mean, he was at Inter for 2 seasons, 3 seasons at Juve. This is his first at 6 and a half a season at Atalanta, where he did all right, although that was very early in his career. But if we look at 6 starts, this is his 6th full season in the Serie A. We're looking at someone who's going to win 5 Scudetti out of 6 starts in the Serie A.
Could.
Will. But I know that the scaramanzia and blah, 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 and I respect that. I just don't. I don't.
No, the last thing I need is someone clipping up me saying Napoli will win the Scudetto with 4 games to go. And then I can't be having that.
Can't have that. I understand. Yeah, I understand. No, but look, we're talking that, and I think this is his Mona Lisa. This is his masterpiece. I don't think this squad, no one else could do this with this squad than he does, because of the fact that, not just the fact that he plays once a week, he's done it so many times before. That Juve side and Chelsea side that he took from nothing, they were in complete ashes when he took them over. Playing once a week wins the Scudetto. You can say he kind of did that with Inter as well, because they finished dead last in the Champions League in the group for the first time in the club's history. But after that, he only had one competition. And I think what he is fantastic at, and also if you look at the Europa League final, one competition to focus at. I think when he has one competition to focus at, he's almost unbeatable. And I think with this Napoli thing, when he wins this Scudetto, the way I see it, this is his masterpiece. This makes him, for me, the greatest Italian league manager of all time. Because when you do it, and to do it at Napoli as well, let's remember Carlo Ancelotti couldn't do it, who probably is considered the greatest of all time right now.
But he's not a league coach, though, is he, Ancelotti?
Exactly.
He's the Champions League specialist.
Yeah, he is.
So that's
yeah. But the thing is, he has won the league. He's the first coach to win the league in the top 5 leagues, Ancelotti. But yeah, granted, he's not.
Sure, he also lost a Ligue 1 title to Montpellier.
He did. He absolutely did. But I mean, we're talking about the creme de la creme. But when it comes to league coaches, I really struggle to find a better league coach in Italian football history than this man once he secures that Napoli title. Because you look at that squad, they shouldn't be in a title race. And I understand that some people will say, well, it's not their fault that Inter are having the season they're having, that Juve. I get that. But you also have to capitalize when the opportunity presents itself. And in the league, he's unbelievable at that.
No, he is. And you say, oh, it's not their fault that Inter are capitulating, etc. I mean, Napoli have 74 points. There are 4 matches to go. They could finish on 86 points, which, if memory serves, was exactly the same tally that Milan got when they beat Inter to the Scudetto, what's now 3 seasons ago. So that's more than respectable. I think anything north of 85 and you're going to be very close to win this, because, yes, you get those anomalous years, Juventus 102, Napoli got 91 and finished second under Sarri, infamously, etc. Both Napoli and into the last 2 seasons have been mid-90s as well. But again, that was winning with almost a 20-point cushion. I think you're right. And I love the way you describe that as his Mona Lisa, his masterpiece, because it also going to be slightly self-indulgent here, which, as you know, I like to be. It reminds me of Rory McIlroy's recent win at the Masters at Augusta, and Jim Nantz, who's a big hero of mine, the CBS golf commentator. He said, the long wait is over. McIlroy has his masterpiece. And it was a nice play on words, because it was the 4th and final piece of the Grand Slam, and it was the Masters, so it's his masterpiece. And I think it's very similar with Conte here. You're right. I mean, we're talking about 5 Scudetti across 3 different teams. A Napoli team, which you said don't have a winning tradition. They've won 3 of these in their club history. 2 of them came with arguably the greatest player of all time. And I know Carlo would say take out the arguably, probably. So a nod to
I would say that as
friends.
Well.
Absolutely.
The greatest of all time, Diego Armando.
Exactly. I'm English, so it pains me still. It's still got, on the one hand, I've got the sort of the in-laws, with the Maradona poster up on my mother-in-law's wall and all this sort of stuff. On the other hand, I've got my dad saying, "You were born in 1986. We were cheated out of the World Cup." So I've got this horrible existential crisis going on.
I love it.
Anyway, I digress. But I think only a 4th ever Scudetto, 2 of them with Maradona. The 3rd one was just unbelievable football, and 2 players who were just at the peak of their powers, Osimhen and Kvaratskhelia. The latter, the league didn't know what to expect from him, and for 6 months they didn't know how to deal with him. Then they got a little bit used to him, etc. So I think, and it's so reductive. We need to try and get things straight here. There is a case to say, could Napoli compete for the Scudetto under Conte because they finished 10th and they have no European football? Yes, there was a case for that, and plenty of people advanced that case, yourself included. Does that mean that Conte is not in European football automatically means Napoli should win the Scudetto? No. And if it were as simple as that, every other coach would follow suit. Okay, you can't finish 10th to avoid qualifying for European football, because then, you do yourself a disservice. You have to go through 2 extra rounds of Coppa Italia qualification, which I always find ironic that Conte actually beat Modena and Palermo only to then go out in the round of 16 when he could have just gone out in the first round on penalties to Modena. But okay, maybe that would have been disastrous from a PR perspective. Fine. So there's that. But the other side of it is, if it were that simple, everyone would be doing it. Down tools in Europe, go out of that, play the reserves in the Coppa Italia. But no, because you have to put your money where your mouth is. Do you see what I mean? So it's easier in some ways to try and compete for everything and say, oh, we valiantly failed, as opposed to someone bullishly saying, I'm going to make 10 changes against Lazio in the Coppa Italia. We've gone out to a Tijani Noslin hat-trick, by the way. That shows you how bad that Napoli team was that night, because he's barely scored any goals beyond that. And since then, like you said, one game a week. And it's even allowed them to have that big trough after that 7th win in a row in late January. But it coincided with Inter tiring and stumbling, Atalanta falling away. And he knew that one way or another, if he gets to mid-80 points, he's got a very good chance. I think you're absolutely right. This is an astonishing feat of coaching. And, he's proven me wrong.
No, he's unbelievable. He is unbelievable. And he is a fascinating character, and in many ways. And a lot of people actually think I admire and love him. I can't stand him as on a personal level, but I'm fascinated by him. I think we have to kind of separate personal feelings and factual greatness. He is unbelievable. I mean,
well, he's a genius, isn't it? And often they're unhinged. If you're allowed to say that, that's probably not very politically correct.
I think he is unhinged. If we remember that the man literally spoke about taking it in the butt last week.
I didn't care for those comments.
I mean, this is him being in a Scudetto race, and he's talking about people trying to do him up the bum. I mean, I don't even know what to say to that. Like, you know what I mean? I just, this is how he is. He's a genius, and people who are genius and brilliant are sometimes very difficult to work with. But then again, two things can be true at the same time, at least.
Carlo often says the same about you, for what it's worth.
Oh dear.
That was a nice backhanded compliment, wasn't it?
It was.
Nima, you're a genius, but a diva with it.
Oh dear. Right. Let's move on to the other Scudetto candidate, or former Scudetto candidate from where I'm standing, Inter.
Oh, here we go.
Who lose to Roma.
I get out my tiny violin?
No, you shouldn't. You absolutely shouldn't, because I have an idea about this, and I want to talk about this. So Inter Scudetto are 3 points now behind Napoli. They've got Hellas at home, Torino away, Lazio at home, Como away, Barcelona twice, this in 2 days' time, and after Hellas. Then potentially, if they are to go through against Barcelona at the end of, after the Como game, they got the Champions League final. So they're 3 points off now. And above all, in these 3 games against Milan, Bologna, and Roma, it's an Inter that, as I tweeted out in a long tweet that kind of went viral, look, it's not that they have no gas. There's not even fumes in the tank. For me, when your cohesive press as a team falls apart in the 90th minute, from which then Roma score, without Roma really doing much for that to happen, that tells me that the last drop of energy came against Bayern Munich to reach the semi-final of the Champions League. And there is nothing left. They look exhausted and shattered. And on top of that, the injury situation and all of that. And therefore, for me, from where I'm standing, unless there's a miracle against Barcelona, which we're going to talk to, we're going to preview that game, I'm looking at Zeru Tituli. And my question to you then, of course, is, do you think that would be, how big of a failure is that?
If you say to someone at the start of the season, Inter are going to be involved in, obviously, the domestic championship, so Serie A, the Coppa Italia, the Super Cup, the Club World Cup, I know you have your thoughts on that, and the Champions League, and Inter won't go home with a single piece of silverware. And if you're factoring in the Super Cup as part of that tally, and I think you would, because otherwise you have to discredit half of Simone Inzaghi's 6-piece trophy haul, which we'll get onto as well. I think you would be underwhelmed. You'd describe that as a failure. The question is, do you make allowances for how close Inter have come? History can be very unkind. In years to come, we might look back and say Inter finished second into a Champions League runners-up. They might go out in the semi-finals. We could look back in a few years' time and say Inter lost the Super Cup final to Milan, spurning a 2-goal lead in the final in the second half. Inter crashed out against Milan in the Coppa Italia semi-finals. Inter finished as runners-up to Napoli in the Scudetto race. and Inter went out in the semi-final / final or beaten finalists in the Champions League. And history would be very unkind on that team. However, we've all lived the reality of it. And we know that Inter, until 8 days ago, and the Dall'Ara were really competing on an even footing. In fact, they're ahead of Napoli. It's been a 6-point swing in the title race. Where Napoli are now, this is why when people say it's over, I know there are a lot of factors playing into that. But 8 days ago, Inter were 3 clear of Napoli. Now, 8 days later, Napoli are 3 clear of Inter. I think we're getting ahead of ourselves if we think the title race is over. But yes, it depends on your lens, on your prism. If you see it as looking at the season as a whole, Inter finish trophyless, that is a failure. If you say Inter were competing on 3 fronts and very seriously on 3 fronts until the 20th, 21st of April, it's been a very impressive season. They just ran out of steam. And this is the nature of high-level football. You're only 1 defeat from going out of cup competitions. And as you have said many times, they didn't build up enough of a lead in order to give themselves those jolly, as they call them in Italy, those trump cards that you can play where you can afford to drop points and you're still ahead of the pack,
Exactly.
And I think that's what it boils down to be honest. I think if they were to finish empty-handed, then I think you have to deem it as a qualified failure. But what I would say is it only physical, Nima? That's why I tweeted yesterday. I got no traction at all. You with your viral tweets, mine are just tumbleweed. I said, in a parallel universe, what happens if Orsolini doesn't score? That game ends in a draw, and Inter stay ahead of Napoli, a point clear. They don't lose to Bologna. Maybe they still go out of the Coppa Italia, but they begin that game against Roma, and they begin the weekend with a 1-point cushion. They're ahead of Napoli. They don't have the psychological thing of Napoli pulling level. They don't have the psychological devastation of conceding a last-minute winner to a Bologna side. Another defeat against Bologna with all of the demons that brings up from previous years. I do wonder how psychologically big that goal was from Orsolini.
I agree. I think it was. I think it's massive. And I think one thing can give another. One hand washes the other kind of situation. I don't think it's just physical fatigue. Look, I look at it a little differently. Or I don't look at it differently. I take a different perspective. I think it was clear. If you look at Marotta and how he works in 3-4 year cycles. That's just how he is. He did it at Juve, he did it at Inter. He started at Inter with Spalletti or Conte. Then he moved to Inzaghi. Now we're at the end of Inzaghi 1.0. We're going into Inzaghi 2.0. In his 3-4 year cycles. His job is to make sure that Inter are competitive, not just this year, but in 3 years' time, in 2 years' time. In order for him to do that, the team that he's constructed is very old. He's not stupid. He knows that. And he knows that he needs to rejuvenate, and he knows he needs to refresh. So going into this season, the objectives was clear. Compete on all fronts. And that Inter have done that. It wasn't win the Scudetto. It wasn't win the Coppa Italia. It wasn't win the Supercoppa. It wasn't win the Champions League. It wasn't win the FIFA Club World Cup. It is compete on all fronts. By definition, Inter have done all that. And especially the Champions League, because that's where the money is. And the FIFA Club World Cup, that's where the money is. And the reason why I bring up the money is because that money allows Inter to rebuild and rejuvenate and win Scudetti 1 or 3 down the line. This is why Petar Sucic has been signed already. This is why Luis Enrique is all but wrapped up already in April, because they know that the revenue is coming in. And they also know that there are 2, 3, 4 players whose contract expire and they can get rid of. So there's room. And more importantly, someone like Marcus Thuram's contract, they need to extend that, and they need to remove that minimum release fee clause. All of this factors into how they look at it. Now, for fans, they have every right to be angry on the sporting results, thinking over a period of 4 or 5 years, we've had the best team in the league. We've only got 1 Scudetto to show for it. That's all valid. But for Inter, the Inter board, for them, it's more important to reach the semi-final of the Champions League than to win 3 Scudetti in a row. From a very hardcore financial bottom line perspective, those are the facts, because that's just how it is. And in order for Inter to be able to win Scudetti in the future, they need that revenue, because they're not going to get that revenue elsewhere. It's not going to come from anywhere else. And so if that means 1 Scudetto, 2 Scudetto, 3 Scudetti lost in order to win 2, 3, 4 down the line, that's just how the cookie crumbles. For them, that's how they view it, because his job is to make sure that Inter are competitive over a longer period of time, and Inter have been, by definition, competitive over the last 4, 5, 6 years. Like, do you see what I'm saying?
I see what you mean, but surely there is an instance where Inter can be competitive on several fronts and still win the most important trophy, which is the domestic title, which is synonymous with consistency over 38 matches. It proves that you're the best team amongst all of your rivals that you play twice a year, every year, those 19 other teams. And I think it would be a failure for Inter to be beaten to the Scudetto by this Napoli side. And you yourself have just said that for 4 years in a row, this is Inzaghi's 4th season. You mentioned Inzaghi 2.0, so I assume you think the contract renewal is nailed on. And if it isn't nailed on institutionally, you think that's the direction they should go in. Yeah. But I would counter that. Inzaghi holding up 3 fingers. I'm going the wrong way on my camera. Holding up 3 fingers, all this stuff. He's recently doubled down. He's changed his communication style, I think, for the worse, because if you talk the talk, you need to walk the walk. He hasn't walked the walk. Jose Mourinho is very bullish, but he backs it up with trophies. Simone Inzaghi will talk to you about how he's got 6 pieces of silverware like Elenio Herrera. The difference is Elenio Herrera won 2 European Cups. He would win league titles. Simone Inzaghi has won 1 Scudetto, 2 Coppa Italias, which, by the way, the fan base are now playing down because Milan knocked Inter out of the Coppa Italia. So all of a sudden, it's now a tin pot trophy. And 3 Super Cups. 3 Super Cups. Let's remember how they qualified for those Super Cups. Year 1, Conte had won the title the year before, so into a reigning champions. Then the format was extended after that. Year 2, Simone Inzaghi won the Coppa Italia, so that allowed Inter to qualify for the Super Cup the year after that. Year 3, Inter then won the Scudetto, didn't they? And then year 3.
Yeah, I know.
They won the Coppa Italia again, and then this is now year 4, which they benefited from winning last season's Scudetto. So, and then it would have been painted very differently had Inter not thrown away that 2-goal cushion. I think we do need to hold the coach to account here. And I'm a big fan of Simone Inzaghi, but what I would say is I think he has been exposed now as being too tactically inflexible, as having a plan A, and we haven't necessarily seen a plan B. Yesterday, before the Napoli game, it's all quite flimsy and a little bit fluid in terms of talking about systems and shapes and things. But there was an article saying that Conte was preparing to play a 6th different formation of the season with Napoli. And we do need to compare it in these terms because it's a 2-horse title race. So Conte, when he's been missing players, he went from a 4-3-3. At one stage, he played a 4-2-4. We see him play a 3-5-2 when Raspadori came to the fore because he was missing players. Kvaratskhelia left. David Neres was injured. And we haven't seen that with Inzaghi. We haven't seen that. We've seen Mkhitaryan, doing overtime. Then he's missing because he's suspended. Bastoni's out, and that famous trite statistic of Inter always concede when Bastoni's out. I mean, it's true. I mean, he's a world-class defender. I mean, it's not exactly rocket science. No. But I think when we look back at now 4 seasons of Simone Inzaghi, should he have achieved more? Has he won 1 Scudetto, if it goes on to be that way? Are we talking about a coach winning 1 Scudetto out of 4 from a position of starting every season as favourites? That's underachievement.
Well, it is that. But if we look at, again, I think in and of itself, that is true. But I think if you put it into the context of what Inter have needed to do, and also the investment in the squad, and the not once having, been able to invest, but the first summer he was there, 140, 150 million positive. The next summer, 60 million. Last summer being plus minus 0. The third summer being plus minus 0 when Thuram and them came. And then last summer, somewhere similar, minus 5 or 10, basically players coming in, going out and so on. At the end of the day, this kind of investment also reflects itself on the pitch. And that's why I bring up having to be competitive or not. And they have been competitive. Now, of course, they should have won more Scudetti. There's no doubt about that. This one in particular is the one that they should have won. But when the club tells you compete on all fronts, then you can't focus and not focus as much on other tournaments because you're told to do this. Otherwise, you lose your job. And that's why I think he will stay, because he has fulfilled what they asked him to do. And that is compete on all fronts.
No, and I completely agree. I think it's a nonsense people trying to suggest that you prioritize one competition, that you almost unconsciously try and go out of a competition. That's not true. Every coach is trying to win every single match. Sometimes, yes, do they make, we've seen it in the past with Mourinho. Again, I'll come back to him because he's a former Inter boss and very successful one, and this was a potential treble winning season, and he's the one to achieve that. We would occasionally see him making statements towards, with some of his actions towards the board. We saw him do it at Roma as well, as if to say, I'm going to pick this player because I don't think I have a strong enough squad. So there's a way of doing it. However, I would agree with you. I think Inter have been valiant in their attempts to win all of these competitions. But ultimately, people are, football is a results game. You're judged on results. And if I can interpret what you're saying, you think now that this season, with the participation in the Club World Cup, which might be worth 100 million euros upwards, I think. Similar for Inter's involvement in the Champions League, particularly with the way that the revenue is distributed, with the market share, with all the Italians crashing out. You're now saying that this should pave the way for a period of domestic dominance. So even if Inter have won one title in 4 years, when maybe they could have won 2, 3, 4, whatever you want, you're saying that for the next 4 years, you're now expecting them to win 4 in a row?
I'm expecting Marotta to, because if we look at the financial meltdown that ensued, COVID, and everything that happened, and Inter's owners lost the club to a bank, investment bank, essentially, because they couldn't maintain ownership. That and all the other issues that financially have plagued Inter, Marotta has managed to leverage throughout of this entire situation, balancing the books whilst remaining competitive, and now finding themselves in a situation where there is 200 million euros in prize money potentially coming in, which has allowed them over the last few years to extend Lautaro, extend Çalhanoğlu, extend Barella, extend Bastoni, and potentially now Marcus Thuram, whilst also, which to me is so important to keep these players. And also now in a position to rejuvenate and to, whilst following sustainability, as he loves to talk about, his job is to make sure that Inter are competitive over 5-10 period of time. Sometimes the trophies that fans don't care about as much, a semi-final is useless to a fan. A title in the league is more worth it. But financially, and in order to move forward for Italian clubs who don't have the revenue streams, the TV deals of the Premier League and all of that, the semi-final of the Champions League is worth 10, 20 times more. Like that's just how it is.
But dare I say, we're in danger almost of getting to, Arsenal under Arsene Wenger latter days here, where top 4 is a trophy in itself. You can't have that at a club like Inter.
No, you can't have that at all.
That's accepting mediocrity. You can't have that.
Absolutely.
I think when it comes to me for Inzaghi, I see a lot of parallels between the situation Inzaghi inherited. He inherited a title-winning team from Conte, just as Allegri did. So Allegri inherited a Juventus team that had won 3 titles in a row. He had 5 seasons at Juventus the first time around, 5 Scudetti out of 5. 4 of those were League and Cup doubles, and reached 2 Champions League semi-finals. Simone Inzaghi, under a similar time frame, this is season 4 now, inherited a title-winning team from Conte, 1 Scudetto, 2 Coppa Italias, 3 Super Cups, 1 Champions League final, maybe 2 at the end of the season, that we could upgrade those Scudetti from 1 to 2. So on that basis, underachievement, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think the absolutely underachievement just in the league for sure. But I think that where Inter were overall, I think it's on the one hand, on the other hand, kind of a discussion. But yes, I did also tweet out after the derby that 3, because I include Conte's first season at Inter in that, 3 very winnable Scudetti buttate. I mean, thrown away. And I do think that's also something to take into consideration. But I just think I think the way that Inter view this is, okay, we've gone through hell and back financially. We've come out of it with trophies, a Champions League final and a Champions League semi-final. Now we're in a much better place financially. We can actually start to invest in the squad and then from then on, that's when we should start winning more trophies and adding to the silverware to the trophy cabinet and competing more. I think the difference between the Arsenal thing is that Arsenal just finished top 4. They didn't compete for any trophies in that period. Inter are competitive here. Now, the trophy haul in and of itself these 4 years is not good enough in terms of the league. I think anyone would agree with that. But I do think there is nuance and context in that. And I think Marotta sees it like that and Inter see it like that. And I think that's why they're going to continue with him. And I think they're all on the same page. And to me, going into this summer, this is the most important and consequential summer that Marotta's been in charge of. Because last summer, again, the first time they won the Scudetto, they had no choice. They were in a financial meltdown. They got rid of Lukaku, Hakimi. They brought in Dzeko. Christian Eriksen had his medical situation. They brought in Çalhanoğlu and they brought in Joaquin Correa when they wanted to bring in Thuram, and Thuram injured himself on that weekend, right? Net huge positive. The last time they won the Scudetto was last season. Well, what did they do? They brought in players on free transfer, and they decided to invest in their backup goalkeeper, which I think is not a stupid decision per se, given Jan Sommer's age. It can turn out to be the right decision long term. But if you're looking to compete on 5 fronts the following season, you've won the league, that's a step sideways at best. And we shouldn't be surprised if they end up with Zeru Tituli when you do that. You know, Conte, Conte won three titles in a row with Juve. And he resigned basically with the famous words, you can't go to a €100 restaurant with €10 in your pocket, because there wasn't enough investment. I think that's a bit exaggerated, but I'm just taking the point that, well, if you take steps sideways when you're the number one instead of pushing forward, you open up a window for people to catch up with you. The first time, Inter had no choice. Last summer they had a choice. The choice they took was, we don't care about winning now as such. We're looking at winning.
No, I don't think they took that. No, Nima, I don't think that was ever a conversation. I don't think that was a conscious thought. I think that's you revising the view of the club. No, you know, you can't go from all of a sudden Inzaghi wagging 3 fingers to say we're going for the treble, and all the fans talking about that, to then suddenly saying, oh, the club made this trade-off at the end of the season. We need to be competitive. It doesn't matter if we don't win any competition. I'm not having that. I'm not having that.
But the finger wagging, he was asked a question by a journalist, but you're in 2 competitions, and said, no, we're in 3. And then he revised it and said, we're in 4. Because that's true. That's factually true. He didn't say we're going to win three trophies.
No, he didn't. But then all the players started talking about the treble, and several players have spoken about it. No, and it's fine. And you need to own it. You need to own it.
Yeah,
and also, you know, if I were you, I know you don't like the Club World Cup. Personally, I would, if you end up with no trophies, I would go all out to win the Club World Cup, which is in an inaugural extended edition. And we don't know how this competition is going to be perceived. It's almost one of those competitions that will be taken seriously depending on how the clubs approach it, much like the Nations League. I don't think the Nations League is anywhere near as bad as people make it out to be. And if you look at the list of winners of that competition, there's some pretty strong nations. That the strongest European nations always end up in the Nations League's final. So on that basis, if I were Inter, I would learn the lessons of what's currently coming to pass. By the way, we should again qualify this. Inter are 2 good performances away from being in the Champions League final. Maybe you don't even need to necessarily play well in one of the games. You know, if you can somehow repeat the heroics of the second leg 2010, when you played for 70, 75 minutes with 10 men and only conceded 1 goal, again, you're relying on having a 2-goal cushion, and it's the other way around this time. You know, first leg, well, not even at Camp Nou, it's at Montjuic. But you know what I mean? So I think we are prematurely drawing conclusions about Inter's season, but I will not accept the fact that Inter consciously said, we might go this season without winning trophies. The important thing is we're competitive on all fronts.
No. I'm not saying that they consciously took that decision. I'm saying that, and I agree with you on the Club World Cup. For the club, it's much more important. Marotta can't stop talking about it. And when he talks about something, that means it's important. He's been banging on the Club World Cup drum for a long time because he knows the math. Because again, Champions League and Club World Cup, that opens up a lot of other doors. That allows you to maybe win a treble. If you're able, you know, because you can rejuvenate, you can bring in new players, you can bring in high quality players, something Inter have not been able to really do, invest in the transfer market for 4 or 5 summers. My point is simply is that at some point, unless you can pull financial levers and bring players in, which Inter can't, then or aren't able to, then that's going to show off on the pitch as well. And when you had a chance to push forward as the number 1 last summer, they chose not to. And to me, actions speak louder than words. The fact that they didn't, and they decided to say we're fine as we are, we'll look at it this way, That to me speaks volumes. Now, of course, Inter are never going to say, no, you know what, we don't care about winning this. No, absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that they'll view this in the long term. Moratti would have sacked everyone. I mean, back in the day, for him, it was trophies and I want now. But he had the right to do so because he was spending the money. It was his own money. He can spend it how he wants. This is a different ownership group. This is a different reality for Inter. They have to view it in 4-year cycles. And that's what they're doing. So is it a failure? We have to qualify it. Yes. Is it a failure that Inzaghi's only won 1 Scudetto in 4 years? Absolutely. But 1 step back, 2 steps forward. We could stand here in 2-3 years' time and be talking about an Inter who was able to invest a lot this summer, laying the foundations of a winning project, and then win 3 domestic trophies and going far. Do you see what I'm saying?
We shall see.
We shall see. Yeah,
I'm conscious of time, Nima, though. But I did like your dig there about Barcelona, about Inter not being able to pull financial levers, and actually let me do it more like that, so it's a bit more less ambiguous. My gestures, pulling financial levers. There we go. So
I want to talk about Roma. Because it is unbelievable what they've done. Just 17 unbeaten, 12 wins, unbeaten in the Serie A in 2025. They're 3 points off Bologna in 4th, 2 points off Juve, Lazio there as well. Their last 4 games, Fiorentina, Atalanta, Milan, Torino. Can they get top 4?
They can, and I actually think the fixture list favours them on this score, because Fiorentina and Atalanta, I think you said they still have to play it. Is that right?
Yeah.
So yeah, Torino and Milan, they're not going to be part of the conversation. But in some ways, people often say the last thing you want is, you've got a tricky fixture list coming up. Actually, when you're playing catch up like Roma, you want to have those 6 pointers, because suddenly it's in your own hands by virtue of the fact that not only are you getting 3 points yourself, you're also taking 3 points off your rivals, and you're not relying on a third party to do that. So I actually think these 6 pointers for Roma are coming at just the right time. And everyone said, they're on this long unbeaten run because they haven't played anyone difficult. Well, they played against Juventus. They trailed at home. They drew, came from behind. They trailed against Lazio in the derby. They drew. Their last 7 games, they've only scored 1 goal, but it doesn't prevent them from getting results. 1-0 win against Inter, 1-0 win against Verona, 1-0 win against Lecce. They're doing it their way. They look rock solid defensively. They have some very experienced defenders. We saw that with Ndikan, and I'm sure we're going to get onto that, albeit hopefully briefly, because I think it's a fairly open and shut case. But Ranieri has got the best out of these players. That's what's so impressive. Soule, who looked a complete fish out of water, who didn't seem to fit in De Rossi's system, didn't seem to work with Juric. All of a sudden, Ranieri has come in and said, okay, these are the players that I've got. What's the best system for these players? Which I know is something you constantly bang on about when it comes to Italy and Spalletti and so on and so forth. And I think you're right there. You have to, what's it they say in Italian? It's about being a tailor and finding the right fit for the team you've got. And I think he has really got that perfect fit for this team. They look organized. They look like they've got belief. There's no dissent. He's able to exclude the club captain, Lorenzo Pellegrini, stick and carrot. We saw him inspire him to that goal, his first league goal of the season in the first of the 2 derbies. I've been so impressed with what Roma are doing. Shomorodov, who played with last year at Cagliari, he was on loan. He said, no, don't want this guy to leave in January. I want him to stay at the club. He's contributing, should really have scored that goal. It's only a miraculous block from Carlos Augusto. Otherwise, it's 2-0 and it's game over already. So impressed with Roma. And I think they've got a very good chance. When you consider Lazio still have to play Juventus, Bologna still have to play Juventus. A couple of those games end in draws, just as Roma win their matches. We need to see where the league table is after 36, 37 matches. It's now an incomplete verdict. But Roma, if you said to them in December, when they were 2 points ahead of the bottom 3, that they would go on an 18-match unbeaten run, and all of a sudden they'd be within, striking distance of the top 4, and they would have laughed in your face. So it's an astonishing achievement.
It absolutely is. And before we talk about Ranieri, we have to talk about Matias Soulé. One thing Ranieri, he had a fantastic season last season at Frosinone, and Juventus decided to sell him. Claudio Ranieri's come in and said that he's the future of Roma, which I'm glad that he did, because I agree with that 100%. I think given where Dybala is in terms of age and his fitness, I think Roma should build around Soule the same way Juve should build around Kenan Yildiz. We're going to talk about him too, regardless of his mistake. But Speaking of Juventus and mistakes, do you think they made a huge error getting rid of Matias Soulé?
I think they did make a mistake. Whether it's huge or not, I don't know. I'm sure that the incoming coach, Thiago Motta, would have had some say on what the club's transfer policy was going to be. And the problem is the way that the rules are structured at the moment with regards to financial sustainability. It used to be called financial fair play. You know, you have the profit and loss rules in the Premier League as well. The way the rules are currently structured, and this benefited Napoli as well, is that you make much more money when you sell an academy product because there's no transfer fee to offset against, and it's just pure profit. So as a result, you can then go and spend more money. The problem is, and this is what the fan base don't understand, and quite understandably so, they're like, why are we selling Dean Huijsen for this fee? And then all of a sudden, a year later, he's being touted to join all the best clubs in the world. Why are we selling Soulé for this fee? You know, and then we're going and spending the money on Turncoat Mainers, who's already much older and hasn't worked out. On Douglas Luiz, I know there was some creative financing there, you know, with Enzo Barrenechea and Samuel Lilling Jr., you know, that pretty much offset the same fee, etc. But certainly on this evidence, the way Soulé is playing now, I think 5 goals in Serie A, all of them have come on the road. His last 2 goals have been the winner at San Siro against Inter, the equaliser in the derby against Lazio. He's scoring big goals and he's contributing in a Roma team that are missing Paulo Dybala through injury. And then you look at Juventus, they've been toiling all season long. Vlahovic hasn't really worked out. Kolo Muani was a rash rush signing in January. And Juventus just haven't had consistency. They haven't scored any goals from midfield. Okay, he's a winger. On that basis, would Juventus have been better served keeping him? Yes, I think Juventus would have been better served keeping both Huijsen and Soulé. And I would have liked to have seen Thiago Motta, who was touted as being this excellent coach at working with players, at improving individuals, at really developing young players. I would have liked to have seen him given the opportunity to work with that raw materials. He wasn't, and we know what came to pass.
I agree 100% with that. I think exactly for the reasons you outlined, I really don't have anything else to add other than I think, especially given that Thiago Motta wanted to play a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1 and he wanted to have a winger, it makes sense. And also with Huijsen, and now they've ended up with Lloyd Kelly, or Lord Kelly as Carlo calls him. But so it is a weird one. It absolutely is a weird one. But I just wanted to pick your brain on Claudio Ranieri, because I am, you know, he's a lovely man. Everybody loves him because he's a wonderful human being. He's very respectful. He's very correct. He's a gentleman. But what he's doing with Roma is truly unbelievable. Do you think that Roma should maybe not just appoint him permanently as the manager and not as this kind of direttore generale or direttore sportivo, whatever they're basically saying that he's going to do next season?
I see him increasingly uncomfortable with the future. I think there's no clarity on what his situation will look like next year. I think he's made that fairly obvious. You know, he said, I don't want to get in the way. I don't want to be a stumbling block, an impediment to my successor. He was supposed to have a role in picking the head coach. I don't know how clear that is now. Then he occasionally rose back from that and say, no, it'll be the ownership, the Friedkins. It will be the sporting director, Florent Ghisolfi, who will choose the head coach. It's so tricky because you do start to wonder, okay, we have a much greater weight of evidence, body of work from Ranieri than we did with Daniele De Rossi. But we shouldn't forget that this time last year, Daniele De Rossi went on an incredible, started to fade a little bit in the spring, something that Ranieri hasn't done. But De Rossi went on an incredible run. We saw it in the past with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer at Manchester United when he took over from Jose Mourinho. Sometimes you just do need a clean break. You make things very simple for the players. The players start to perform because it's a complete fresh start. I think that's unfair and reductive when it comes to Ranieri, because we're talking about someone who won a Premier League with Leicester City. We're talking about someone who's achieved all over the globe. You know, he's coached in Spain, he's coached in Italy. However, at his age, does he want to start a season with expectations on based on what he's achieved this time? Let's be honest, when he came in, it was a case of make sure Roma don't get embroiled in a relegation battle, which was looking increasingly likely, and restore the dignity to the great club. He did both of those. And then he's built on that. The rest of it was a free hit, and he's going really well. The question is, does he have the appetite at his age? I think he's 73. Does he have the appetite to now go and coach? Because there's no point in him coaching for 1 year or 2 years. You know, a club like Roma needs stability. They need a coach for 2, 3, 4 years. That's why Inter are successful. I know we've spoken about Inter already, but Inzaghi's been there 4 years. That's why
Stability.
Inter are successful. It's all about stability. And you'll see that with most clubs, and then it's the chicken or the egg. It's, are you successful because you stability and you showed patience with the coach? Or is it a case of the coach was good, so it was easy to keep him on? I think he needs to have a very clear brief and a role and responsibility if they are to keep him as a senior management. Because the other issue will be, if the new coach comes in and fails immediately, Ranieri's going to be sat there. The cameras are going to be cutting to him every game. The fan base are going to be clamoring for him. So in some ways, I almost think he'd be better. I see why he wants to do it. It's his club. He loves his club. He's coaching them for the 3rd time. He lives in the city. It's a perfect sort of semi-retirement role. But equally, I think if you are looking towards retirement, then you either need to retire completely or you need to be all in on your career. And I don't think you can do anything half-heartedly. So if I were him, I would just finish on a high and say, this is great, and I'm going to go and watch Roma as a fan. But I think he still has an appetite for something else. The problem is he needs to make sure that he can contribute, and most of all, the club are going to listen to him. And there also needs to be assurances for the new coach that if he comes under pressure, that Ranieri's not going to... I know you said he's a real gentleman, but there must be a temptation for Ranieri to then, be like, oh, okay, I can take the team. The last thing you want is for him to just be undermining his successor with his mere presence. Maybe he's not actually consciously doing something. Maybe he's not saying anything, but that figure of Ranieri in the background with a new coach trying to make his way with that demanding fan base. I mean, I actually think there's more scope for things to go wrong than to go right, unless they're all very clear. The club come out, the owners say this, the sporting director says this is Ranieri's role, and then there's the head coach, and the head coach has the full backing of that entire power group, whatever you call it. That's terrible. You know what I mean?
100%. I think that's a fantastic way to leave that discussion and move over to something a little bit more sadder, or far more sadder, and it is the Atalanta-Lecce game, which was completely overshadowed by the tragic death of Graziano Fiorita, the physiotherapist who was there for 26 years. I'm going to read the statement from Lecce that they put out before the game started, and then I'm going to ask you to kind of contextualize what happened and what Lecce wanted and didn't get, and what, basically just give us some context into that. So basically, Lecce put out a statement before the game saying, Lecce considered the decision of the Lega Serie A to reschedule the game with Atalanta so few hours after the death of our Graziano Fiorita to be terribly disrespectful towards the awful loss that struck the family of this man, the club, and the Lecce fans. In other cases, which were just as painful, more reasonable decisions were made. What emerges is a hierarchy of death based on the prestige of the club, or worse still, considering the job of the person who died. The team, for those who know football, represents a bubble outside the spotlight where the less media-friendly figures can be leaders and virtuous examples for the others. That was the case for our Graziano, who for 26 years worked at Lecce, and as far as we are concerned, will continue to be with us. Graziano Fiorita died while he was in the training retreat with the squad, far from his wife and 4 children, and is still lying thousands of kilometers away from home, waiting for the magistrates to authorize his return. This game should not have been played today, but all attempts to delay it were cynically rejected. We thank Minister for Sport Andrea Abodi for trying to the bitter end, without success, to reorganize the match on a more suitable date. The team will step onto the pitch despite the fact that they only left Salento today, with a vain hope of a rethink that never arrived. Graziano's memory would not be honored by refusing to play or fielding the youth team players. When faced with a grave injustice, we do not respond by blatantly violating the rules. That would be more like competing with a Lega on who could behave worse. We will play the match of trampled values, but we do it wearing an anonymous white jersey that does not represent us. It has no colors, no badges, no logos. We will return to wearing our jersey when Graziano will be back home and can be honored as he deserves by his people. That's a very, very harsh statement, an angry statement. Just to clarify this, when was the game originally supposed to be played? Was it rescheduled? Friday evening. And they rescheduled that because of the Pope's funeral?
No. The game, Graziano Fiorita died on Friday. So the game was then called off.
So they rescheduled it from Friday to Sunday.
Yes.
When did Lecce want to play this game? Has anything come out from that?
Lecce wanted the match to be scrubbed entirely from the match day 34 calendar. They wanted it to be played at a later date because the team they had already left Salento. It's a long trip for those that don't know Italian geography. So Salento, where Lecce is right in the heel of the boot. Atalanta's in Bergamo, so it's right up in Lombardy. It's a short flight, but it's still a long distance to travel. And the team were already in the north of Italy in the Retiro preparing for the match when the physio was discovered dead. And so they wanted, understandably, to go home with Graziano Fiorita and his body. And obviously they can't do that because of the way the Italian legal system works. I believe that an autopsy needs to be, I don't want to be misquoted here, but I assume that's what's currently preventing the family from being reunited with his body. And so, Lecce were in no frame of mind to play the game. That's why they then went home. And as they said in the statement, they were waiting until the last possible minute, the 11th hour, to see whether their request to have the match postponed would be accepted or not, in which case they wouldn't have then needed to travel once again up north and play the game. So they feel very slighted. All of the content of the statement there is obviously an allusion to the fact that this has coincided in the week when Pope Francis has died. Saturday was a day of national mourning. There was a lot of controversy surrounding Inter's fixture against Roma, which was scheduled to be played at 6 o'clock on Saturday. Inter offered the chance to play at 8:45 on Saturday. They eventually said no. Inter had initially pushed for the game to be postponed from match day 34. The reason that wasn't accepted was for a whole host of reasons. There were implications with disciplinary sanctions. Mkhitaryan and Bastoni, who were suspended, they would have served a ban not against Roma, but rather against Verona in Inter's next home game. There was talk of various pressure from other parties. So all that meant that Inter had to honour their fixture, and they ended up playing it Sunday at 3 o'clock. As a result of this, I think what Lecce are suggesting is that a precedent had already been set by the league that no fixtures were going to be postponed on that match day. And so that's why the game eventually went ahead, because again, it's such a difficult one. I need to be very careful about what I say, but I think the main bone of contention comes down to the fact that Lecce are competing with teams like Venezia, Empoli, Cagliari, Parma to try and stay in the division. Atalanta are competing with Juventus, Bologna, Roma, Lazio, Fiorentina to try and finish in the Champions League. So the league, I would think, I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone here, I assume the league's rationale is in the same way that Inter's fixture for sporting integrity needed to go ahead on the same weekend as Napoli's so as to avoid having an asterisk and matches to be replayed in the calendar in the near future. The same is true of Atalanta and Lecce. However, I'm not sure necessarily it was factored in the wave of emotion that this bereavement caused and the significance of that figure for a club, which is a small club that represents a lot of people, by the way. It's not just Lecce, it's the greater Salento area as well, which that club represents. And they're a very proud club and fan base. And they just couldn't fathom why this game wasn't able to go. You know, I almost think you'd have been better off consulting the other clubs involved and saying, Lecce would like to have this game postponed. Do you object? But then, of course, you can't do that, and you can't publicly having a team, you know, renouncing that and saying, well, no, we want them to play, we need them to play. So it was a very difficult situation. Lecce weren't happy with the way the situation was handled. It has been played. To their credit, they were able to get a draw away at Atalanta, having lost 4-0 at home to Atalanta on the opening day of the season. All this with Nikola Krstovic, their top scorer and almost one-man player at times. He was a one-man team at times. He was suspended. So I think they will be on the pitch. They're certainly going to be playing for Fiorita. And yeah, it was a very powerful statement because it's such a colourful region. They're a very colourful team. Giallorossi, you know, you look at the stadium, the Via del Mare, it's always decked out in these colours. It's a very, you know, it's what this club is all about. So for them to have no colours, no crest, you know, I think it was senza colori, senza valori or something like that, without colours, without values. Really strong statement. And Yeah, just tragic. A good friend of mine and colleague, Raffaele Papada, who comes from Nardò in the province of Lecce. He knew Graziano very well. He spoke very emotionally about the impact he'd had as a person and at that club. He knew him very well. He spoke on Lega Serie A Radio Serie A. I don't know if the clip is available anywhere, but if it is, I'd certainly recommend watching that. And a tragic story. And I don't think there was a possible conclusion to this that satisfied all parties, and I think there was always going to be a disappointed party. But I think, possibly in hindsight, Lecce's wishes needed to be respected given what came to pass. But again, I need to, I don't have any inside knowledge of this. I'm just trying to report the facts.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I understand that. And if we look at Lecce's run-in now, they're 2 points ahead of Venezia. They've got Napoli next game, the return of the prodigal son, Antonio Conte. They got Verona away, they got Torino at home, and Lazio away in this quest to avoid relegation. Atalanta, on the other hand, they had a two good form. They beat Milan. Excuse me. They beat Milan and Bologna, and of course now they've drawn. I think they've got a 5-point cushion over fifth. It does feel that they're out of the woods. They're just 6 points behind Inter. It feels like Atalanta are going to finish third, and play in the Champions League. First of all, do you agree with that? And more importantly, this Gasperini situation, I just want to quickly get your thoughts on that. Do you think he resigns at the end of the season?
Well, I heard Gasperini actually in the car on the way home yesterday, because Atalanta ended up playing against Lecce at the same time as the Napoli-Torino game, which I did. And he said that if they were to qualify for the Champions League this season, he thinks it would be their greatest achievement of all of his 9 seasons at the helm, which I think was a little over the top. He seems to be forgetting they won the Europa League last season. But I think what he meant was it was probably their most impressive Champions League qualification, because he said that lots of players had the experience of last season, went into this campaign drained, having given so much last season, having won the Europa League. So again, his statements increasingly sound like someone who is laying the ground for their departure. Again, they're quite pointed comments there. Does he resign? Do they pay him off? I don't see him necessarily resigning with a year still to run. I believe there's still a year to run, isn't there? I don't think he necessarily does that and leaves a year's contract on the table unless he has something else lined up. But I'm now beginning to wonder, where does he go? He's publicly said that the opportunity to go abroad has been and gone, and he had offers from the Premier League in the wake of the Europa League victory over Leverkusen in Dublin. And I think Juventus, which would have been his dream, that's not going to happen as well, more than anything, probably because of his age. And I know you've also cast aspersions about his suitability for the job because of his character and his conduct and so on and so forth, which, there could be some truth. Yeah, I think there's definitely some merit to that. So, Ranieri immediately scotched any talk of, unless they're being, very cagey and, well, quite frankly, dishonest. Because Ranieri, they mentioned, Roma, there's going to be a vacancy, and he said, who wouldn't want to manage Roma? So then we got 3 or 4 days of newspaper articles. Then the next time Ranieri appears publicly, it's like, is Gasperini going to be appointed? No. But then again, Ranieri did say, you will never see Angelino as a left centre-back again, I promise you that. And we haven't seen him as a left centre-back. So maybe he's a man of his word. I don't know. But so you need to look at it this way. Gasperini is at Atalanta, who are now an established Champions League club thanks to him. Where can he go? He can't go to Inter. They wouldn't have him back. He wouldn't want to anyway. Inzaghi's staying on there. He needs to at least go to, Lazio, I think, are going to stick with Marco Baroni. There's a vacancy with Roma, but that's already been scotched. Milan? Do we see him at Milan? I don't see it happening. Napoli, if Conte moves on, I mean, you're swapping one firebrand for another. I think firebrand's a nice way of putting it. So, and then even then, Gasperini's had his run-ins in the past, members of his staff being disparaging about Southern people. So I don't know. He's not going to retire. I really don't. I think maybe hedges his bets, does one more year with Atalanta, and then sees what the market is doing this time next season.
That could very well happen. Speaking of lo stile Juve, and something that is absolutely not lo stile Juve is what Kenan Yildiz did. I don't understand what was going through his head. I mean, Juventus beat Monza, but he will now miss the Bologna and Lazio games for sure. If he's not even given more of a longer ban, even missing the other remaining fixture against Udinese and Venezia after that. And that's the top 4 situation that Juventus are in. I mean, I don't even know what to make of that. Did Yildiz potentially cost Juventus the Champions League here?
Yildiz has been the player that's been most impressive since Tudor came in. He scored the winning goal in Tudor's first game in charge against Genoa. He then scored a goal as well in that victory against Lecce as well, the 2-1 win. So it's going to cost them because he's the one player who has looked like he's started to consistently deliver on his promise. He's still very young. I think he's May 2005, so he turns 20 next month. So he's still very young. So I think we need to give him a bit of a pass due to inexperience. Then again, we've seen that even experienced players can get themselves into trouble. You know, one of the great Juventini of the past, Zinedine Zidane, the 2006 World Cup final. Why do people do certain things? We don't know. It's the human condition. I think it was in the cold, hard light of day. It's a preposterous thing to do because there's no jeopardy there, Juventus against Monza. Opposition players will try and wind you up. It's a sign of flattery. It shows that they fear you and they rate you. And react in such a way maybe whereby you get a yellow card. Then your coach picks up on that. Oh, okay, the teenager's in danger of getting sent off. Let me take him off before he gets sent off. Whereas when you elbow someone in the face, especially in the age of VAR, you leave yourself nowhere to go. Maybe it's something that 10 years ago wouldn't have been spotted by the assistant. The referee missed it because he's looking at the ball or looking at something else. You get away with it. Maybe retrospectively, you're given a fine. I don't know if you're necessarily even allowed to be retrospectively banned after that. But you're right. The next 2 games are Bologna and Lazio. And I think, are both of those games away? Have I got that right? Or is it only one of them? I think it's...
I think both of them are away, yeah.
Yeah. So it's astonishing. You and Carlo have spoken at length about just what a financial disaster it would be for Juventus to miss out on Champions League football. And we thought they were making a charge now with Tudor. But Atalanta, who we thought might get sucked back into it, look like they're going to have enough to finish in the top 4. We know that 5th place is no longer enough for Champions League football because of Lazio's demise and so on and so forth. So what that means is Juventus have 1 Champions League place to play for against the Bologna side that are absolutely loving life. They've got a cup final to look forward to. They're playing football as good as anyone. They, along with Roma, one of the great form teams in the division. You've got to go to the Dallara, which, by the way, you would have seen with Inter, and we've seen many other games. That atmosphere is incredible as well. I do fear for them because can you rely on Colomwani and Vlahovic to get the goals? No. Colomwani hadn't scored since early February until he scored yesterday against Monza. Vlahovic hasn't scored since late February against Cagliari. Cope Mainers has got a handful of goals all season. Douglas Luiz has never scored for the club. You know, Kefren Turam is an excellent box-to-box midfielder, but who is going to score this? Coming back to what I was saying before, if it's not McTominay and Lukaku for Napoli, who's going to score the goals? For Juventus at the moment, looking beyond Yildiz, who scores the goals? Nico Gonzalez from the edge of the box? Again, this is Monza. We need to, Monza is one thing. Bologna are away and Lazio home or away. I think it is away. You'll be able to confirm that for me or not. That's a whole nother matter. And these teams are desperately trying to get into the Champions League. And it's so tight at the moment. It's incredible. They could either finish as high as 4th or way down in 7th.
Yeah, no, they can. And it is away. It's Bologna away and it's Lazio away. So it really is... it's crazy. I just couldn't believe that he would do that or that he lost his mind that way. And I expected to... for me, I'm more shocked than anything. I didn't see that coming at all from him. But again, the pressure must, it's not easy to be Kenan Yildiz and be at Juventus this season, given how it's panned out, even though he's been given more space under Tudor and so on. but Juventus are under pressure. There's no doubt about that. This has been a very, very bad season for them by every metric, and everyone is under pressure. And so pressure gets to people, and they do silly things when they're under pressure. Just quickly, just run through some of the other results. Fiorentina beat Empoli 2-1. They are now in 7th, 59 points. They're also in this top 4. I mean, if Bologna are to win their game against Udinese, they'll be on 63. But Fiorentina will be 4 points off. They've got Roma, Venezia, Bologna, and Udinese. The best part of this is everyone's playing each other as well. It's just, there's nothing like the end of the season in Italy, is it? So, and Fiorentina have got Real Betis in the semi-final of the Conference League. If they go all the way there, they'll secure a spot in the Europa League. So that's something to factor as well. Personally, I think Fiorentina should just focus on winning a trophy. That Piazza needs a trophy, and that they've been in the Conference League so many times, they absolutely have to win that, because it's starting like it's been 3 years now that they've gone to the final, or 2 finals and 1 semi-final. They need to bring that to some conclusion.
They do, and it's such a strange competition, isn't it? When you consider there's only 1 spot in the league for it. Had they won either of those 2 finals, they'd have qualified for the Europa League by winning it. They lost 2 finals. I think it's 3 7th place finishes in a row, isn't it? Or maybe 1 year was 8th because Atalanta got the Europa League. But they finished in exactly the right position every year. No, I think it was 8th in a row, wasn't it? A couple of seasons, because Roma won the Conference League and then Atalanta won the Europa League.
Yeah.
So it's uncanny how they keep it. They will have played more matches in the Conference League than any other team. They've been involved in it every season. They lost to West Ham, okay. Losing to Olympiacos, but as you said, I mean, the problem is, even if they get past Betis, they're probably going to have Chelsea in the final, a team that do not belong in the Conference League whatsoever. That's an anomaly, but you never know.
Yeah, you never know. Milan beat Venezia. Santi Jimenez at the death scored that goal that won it for them. So basically, they've had a really good week, Milan. They beat Inter decisively in the Coppa Italia semi-final. So basically for Milan, I look at it like this. They're in 9th on 54 points. If they win the Coppa Italia, they'll get in the Europa League. If they lose it and finish 7th, they'll get a European spot, as long as Bologna finish in the top 6. And Milan are, as far as if I'm aware, 5 points off Fiorentina in 7th. They got Genoa, Bologna, Roma, and Monza left. I think for Milan, it's about winning the Coppa Italia for the first time since 2003. A trophy they haven't won in a very long time. And I want to get your thoughts on this, because this has been a hot point of contention. If Milan win the Coppa Italia, and they will have done a Simone Inzaghi, as you would like to call it, winning the Supercoppa and the Coppa Italia. But the league, they'll finish 8th or 9th, most likely 9th. How do we judge Milan's season? And how do we judge Sergio Conceicao?
I think we judge Sergio Conceicao favourably, because he wasn't dealt the best hand from Paulo Fonseca, and by his own admission, he came straight in. I think he was appointed on New Year's Eve. By the 2nd of January, Milan were in action against Juventus. They came from behind to beat the Bianconeri, went through to the final. We know what happened in the Super Cup final. They were 2-0 down. They won 3-2. So he immediately won his first 2 matches against Milan's 2 biggest rivals, coming from behind, and won a trophy. That was the peak. Unless somehow Milan can go on to win the Coppa Italia. And as you said, they don't have a good tradition in that competition. I think they've only won it 5 times. Last time they won it was 2003, when they also won the Champions League. But it's so long since Milan last won the Coppa Italia. They've since won the Champions League again in 2007, but not the Coppa Italia. So I think, as a whole, I think it's a very good reference you made to Simone Inzaghi there, because whilst I can be critical of him, yes, he won Coppa Italia and Super Cup, but he always allied it to a Champions League qualification. And that is the big failure of Milan. This is the issue, like you said, in terms of not just financially, significantly financially, because, you have Redbird, just as you have Oak Tree at Inter. Financially, it is significant, but more than anything, so much of Milan's identity is bound up in their prestige as an international force, as Italy's great European club, 7 times European champions. So much of their identity is bound up in that. To not even be in the Champions League, having qualified for it every year since Pioli got them back in, would be a major failing. And we know that it's not going to happen now, because it's I think it's almost mathematically impossible at this
Yeah.
stage. So on that basis, the season is a failure. Can you recover some of the failure? Can you hedge against some of the failure by winning the Coppa Italia to go along with the Super Cup? You can, because the Super Cup is made significant by the way in which you won it and against whom you won it. The Coppa Italia would be similar because you've then knocked out Inter in a two-legged semi-final. It's a season where across 5 derbies, you've won 3 and drawn 2 on the back of losing 6 in a row, which saw you lose the league title and the race to the second star with 5 matches to spare in a derby, a 6th consecutive derby loss on your own ground, into matching the record, point of victory like Napoli, 5 matches to spare. It was the same the previous year. You've then followed that up by winning a derby in the cup, a derby in the league, and a derby in a Super Cup, drawing 2 other which were fairly academic in terms of importance. And if you're to win the Coppa Italia, then you're also able to beat Bologna, who are no mugs by any means. They might end up finishing in the top 4 and qualifying for the Champions League. So I think on that basis, you can certainly reduce how much of a failure it is. Overall, it would be a failure. And I heard some good debate actually on an Inter fan channel, your mate Uncle Sharma, and a lot of people were saying, would Milan Caesar become objectively better than Inter's if Milan end up winning the Coppa Italia and the Super Cup and Inter get the Zeru Tituli? I don't think so, because as we said before, Inter have gone very deep. They've competed almost all the way, and above all, they're a lock on Champions League football. That's sealed. Do you know what I mean? And 4 years from now, we're going to have another edition of the Club World Cup. And the big race now is going to be who's going to get the cumulative points there in terms of European performance to make sure that they're the 2 teams in it. There was a lot of controversy a couple of seasons ago when Napoli needed to get past the Champions League quarterfinals. Actually, I think it was the year after that when they played against Barcelona to edge out Juventus and become the other team along with Inter to get to the Club World Cup. They couldn't. So that's all weighted performance. And what it means is next season, Milan aren't going to be in the Champions League, and it's become that much harder for them to then qualify for the Club World Cup. Again, you can say the Club World Cup is, take it as you leave it in terms of its importance, but this is a major setback. It has impact on the transfer business they can do in the summer. It has an impact on the sort of players they can recruit and attract in the first place. And I start to wonder, if you're Milan, do you almost want to do a Napoli? I'm not saying finish 10th, but be out of European competition next season and then tempt Conte to you and say, do you want to win a 3rd Scudetto with a different club from playing 1 game a week? I don't think he does that, because I don't think he wants to be labelled as the European failure who can only coach domestically in Serie A. I think he really bristles at that suggestion. But imagine if we were to see that. Milan, a year later, going back on their previous decision, basically saying, we got it wrong. We hold our hands up. Ibrahimovic shouldn't have said that. We want Conte, and Conte is going to try and get us to our 20th league title. I mean, that would be an amazing story. I'm getting way ahead of myself, and I realize I've gone really long.
And I think that is the most cinematic thing ever, and it would be the most Conte thing ever, given his ego and how he views himself. Winning the Seconda Stella with Milan, becoming the first coach, as far as I'm aware, you can correct me if I'm wrong, to have won the Scudetto with Milan, Inter, and Juve, on top of having done it with Napoli. That's only happened 3 times before. I mean,
he hasn't done it yet.
No, he has done it. But yeah,
wait for another 3-point swing next week.
Oh God,
Lecce 1, Napoli 0, Inter 5, Verona 0.
Oh yeah. No. He's gonna win it anyway. But no, that would be the most Conte thing ever. Final game, Como beat Genoa. I want to move on to the European midweek fixtures. Real Betis playing Fiorentina in the Conference League on Thursday. But the big talking point, of course, is Barcelona against Inter at the Estadio Luis Companys in Barcelona. They obviously they're renovating the Camp Nou, so they're playing at if I'm not mistaken, it's Espanyol's home ground, isn't it?
Yeah, Montjuic. It's the old Olympic Stadium from
Yeah,
1992.
from 92. Yeah, exactly. So they're going to be playing that. It's Wednesday at 2100 hours, as Carlo likes to call it, for some reason, some weird
Central
reason.
European summertime.
Yeah, Central European time. Yeah, exactly. CET, 2100 hours, as if he's in the military or something. Inter, basically Barcelona, we look at the lineups. Robert Lewandowski has a hamstring injury, definitely going to be out. Alejandro Baldes, from what I understand, it's not yet decided. It's very touch and go. Barcelona's expected lineup is Szczesny, and then Koundé, Kubarsi, Inigo, Gerard Martin or Balde, then De Jong, Pedri, and then Yamal, Gavi, or Fermin Lopez, Rafinha, and Ferran Torres. That's their lineup. As for Inter, Benjamin Pavard has been ruled out, as far as from what I understand. Marcus Thuram is very touch and go. I don't expect to see him to start. I think it's going to be Sommer, Bastoni, Acerbi, Darmian, Carlos Augusto, Mkhitaryan, Çalhanoğlu, Barella, Dumfries, Lautaro Martinez, and Mehdi Taremi. That's the probable lineup I see it for Inter, given that Arnautovic played 90 minutes against Roma as well. So let's, what kind of a game, where will this game be won and lost, and how do you think Inter can knock out Barcelona?
I think Inter can knock out Barcelona by playing a similar sort of performance to the one they've done all season in Europe, where they concede very few goals. I think that's what's been amazing. Okay, they've started to concede more goals in the latter stages of the competition. They conceded 1 against Bayern. They conceded 2 in the second leg against Bayern. So 3 goals across those 2 ties. The important thing is they outscored the German team. But besides that, I mean, you'll know the numbers better than me. I think it was something astonishing, like eight clean sheets in 9 or something ridiculous. I remember it was one goal conceded, wasn't it, in the entire league phase from 8 matches, which I think was the loss against Bayer Leverkusen. So I think Inter have to be within 1 goal, bringing this game back to San Siro six days after the first leg. If Barcelona have too big a cushion, then I think we can rule Inter out. I mean, in a dream scenario, you would emulate what you achieved in 2010 when you had a 2-goal cushion, but I think that's very unlikely. And from what I can see, I don't cover Spanish football, but Barcelona obviously are chasing their own treble. They've just won the Copa del Rey. Yes, they went to extra time, so they'll be fatigued. But I think, again, that's offset by the fact that they've just beaten Real Madrid to a trophy. They might have, got Carlo Ancelotti dismissed in the process. They know that Real Madrid aren't going to win the Champions League. They're determined to win another of those trophies. So I think a lot of it will hinge on Inter's ability. I'm not saying necessarily to keep a clean sheet, but to only concede 1 goal. And I think even if you only concede 1 goal and you don't score, you're within 1 goal. We can see the tie easily turned around. We saw that with Bayern. Yes, Fratesi scored late on, but as soon as Kane scores, all of a sudden the tie is level again. And even then, when Inter suddenly then go 2-1 up, as soon as Bayern score again, then it hangs in the balance once more. So I don't expect the tie to be decided in the first leg. But I think if you're going to get a result against Barca, then you need to shut down Lamine Yamal. And who knows how to do that? We've seen all sorts of defenders try and fail over the last year, 18 months, both for his club side and for the national team as well. There's scope for him to become a European champion at club and international level before he's even 18 years of age, which just blows my mind. And I think Rafinha is very much in the run for the Ballon d'Or as well, isn't he? I think he's scoring as many goals as anyone. So they've got lots of different ways they can hurt you. In some ways, from a sort of very Italian-centric perspective, I hope that if it is Szczesny between the sticks, that he's able to make a mistake, and then Inter can have the double satisfaction of not only scoring against Barcelona, but scoring thanks to a mistake from a former Juventus goalkeeper. I mean, there'd be something nice for the Inter fans to sort of crow and cheer about that. But, again, I think it's an advantage that it's not at the Camp Nou. It's at a stadium which, yes, Barcelona have been playing at, but it's not going to have the same fear factor, and it's not going to have the same noise and atmosphere. And I think Inter, as long as the fans don't do that irritating thing of refusing to chant for 20 minutes because they're protesting ticket prices in the return leg, if the Meazza is bouncing, which we know it can do and often has done, then as long as Inter are within 1 goal, you've been saying all season long, and I have to, for once, I have to say you're right. I mean, it might be the first time in your life you've ever been right, and certainly the first time I've ever admitted you're right. You've been saying it all season long. Inter's form in the Champions League is completely removed from what they're doing in Serie A, and the two are not linked, bizarrely. Whether they will be linked now, I don't know, because it is three straight defeats without scoring. I mean, but you'd be able to answer this question a lot better than me. How do you see it panning out?
I think there's a couple of things I'm looking at. Number one is Federico Di Marco cannot, under any circumstances, start in this game.
And I don't think he will.
No, I don't think he will either. I think but mainly because Federico Di Marco, he has lots of good things about him and his game, but defensive weaknesses. One thing we saw that he's been doing for 4 years, and that is he doesn't close players down because he knows that he will be done by them, especially technical players. The problem when he stands off is like you saw the goal that Bayern Munich scored or Harry Kane scored. He stands off and gives him all the time in the world. You cannot do that against Lamine Yamal. He will murder you. He will rip you apart. Carlos Augusto is much better at that. And Inter defend as a unit. And the problem when Di Marco plays is that there's a domino effect because Mkhitaryan and Bastoni have to help him out, which means they can't focus on their primary duties. With Carlos Augusto, that's sorted. They defend zonally, already down that left-hand side. Augusto's tighter on Lamine Yamal. And also it allows Mkhitaryan and Bastoni to kind of screen and block passing lanes that Inter need to be very wary of with Barcelona. And of course, Barcelona's high line. The key here is Denzel Dumfries because he's very quick and he's outstanding when he has space to attack. And if Inter can win the ball and Barella can start threading balls to a Denzel Dumfries who attacks the space, a lot of it is won. However, there's the other side of it as well, and that is something that I saw when I was watching this El Clásico Copa del Rey final, and that is something that Barcelona are outstanding at. And that is not just how they counter press and win the possession within 10, 20 seconds, which they've always been good at. Look at the first goal that Barcelona score. It is, if there's a camera angle that just blew my mind away. Jude Bellingham is about to play a through ball, thread a through ball, I think for Vinny, and he would be alone with the goalkeeper. But then you see in that angle, look at Pedri. He's so smart. He knows that ball is going to come. He's anticipating to win that ball by cutting that passing lane, but he doesn't want to do it too soon. He wants Bellingham to play that ball so that he can slide tackle in and win that ball whilst they're in transition, Real Madrid, and then hurt them on the counter, which is exactly what happened. And Lamine Yamal, Real Madrid are 6s and 7s. Defensively, they're all over the place. They don't know where they are. Lamine Yamal occupies 4 players, plays a wonderful through ball back, and Pedri with a magical finish. Inter have to be careful of that. It's not just not losing the ball in transition. It's also executing what they want to do quickly and assertively, not giving Barcelona, their midfield, chance to read what they want to do, because that way, what we've seen with Barcelona, and above all Pedri, is they lay traps for you. They lure you in. Oh, come on, then play that pass. Win the ball, counter, score, done. That's what Inter have to be very, very, very wary of. And I am a little bit worried with Pavard not playing, with Bisek playing down that right-hand side. If he decides to play Bisek, I hope he doesn't. I hope he plays Darmian as the right centre back and Dumfries as the wing back. That's what I would do, because I feel with what we've seen from Bisek, and I think he's a decent player, he's a young player, but he hasn't taken those steps. He's made lots of mistakes in decisive situations, and it's right to play him because otherwise young players never learn. But I would not gamble that in a Champions League semi-final. I just would not do that. I would go with Darmian. I would go with Dumfries. Defensively and counter-attacking wise, they give you another option. They give you something to hurt Barcelona with, because Barcelona do have weaknesses. And then finally, Inter's energy levels. I mean, I don't know what they are. That's the big unknown. Is it the Inter that we've seen in these 3 games? Or do they somehow manage to still be able to dig in deep and bring that extra thing that we've seen them do in the Champions League this season? It's a completely different concentration. It's a completely different Inter mentality. The game plan, they're always well drilled and well prepared, but the way they execute, the way they work cohesively from Lautaro to Sommer is something that is completely different in the Champions League. I know that they would never admit this, but I think it's very obvious that having won the Scudetto a couple of times and all these other trophies they've won domestically, they've been to 2 European finals. Lautaro, Bastoni, Barella. These guys have not won it. Hakan, they've not won that Champions League. They've not won a top European trophy, and that weighs on them. And also, if you look at Lautaro Martinez's form, the last 6 games he's played in the Champions League that he started, he scored in every single one of them. I think 7 of those 8 goals.
7 goals in the last 5 games. I think it is
5. Sorry, 7 goals in 5 games. That's 7 out of those 8 goals have come from the last 5 games he's played in the Champions League that he started. That tells me that he, the Ballon d'Or discussion, he knows if he's going to win that, he has to deliver in the Champions League. Well, that's Ballon d'Or winning level. That's Ballon d'Or winning form. You deliver like that against Barcelona at that level, and you go to the final, you win the Champions League. Like you said, alluded to earlier correctly, the narrative changes completely. No one will remember all that other stuff if Inter win their 4th Champions League. All of that flies out the window. And you have a Lautaro, the captain of Inter, potentially being a Ballon d'Or candidate for real if he continues to be decisive. So to me, it's very difficult to predict this. I do still think Barcelona are favorites. I can't get past based on what we've seen. I hope I'm wrong. I think Barcelona win this by 1-2-1.
Okay.
First leg. What do you think?
So you'd probably take that then. I mean, that's what I was saying earlier on. I think if you're within 1 goal, you're okay. The fear I have is that it could end up being a one-sided tie like Arsenal Real Madrid was. And Arsenal won the first leg 3-0 at home, and then it's pretty much done. There was all that talk about remontada, but it never came to pass. And Arsenal actually won the second leg as well. And ordinarily, I would say Simone Inzaghi teams don't lose by big margins. But we saw them lose 3-0 in Florence in January, and we saw them lose 3-0 just a few days ago in the Cup. So the most important thing for them to remember is not to capitulate, basically. It's not a league game where whether you lose 1-0 or 3-0, it doesn't matter. And it's not a second leg of a cup tie where it was level in the first leg, and once you go 2-0 down, you have to chase the game. They need, I don't care if they go full on catenaccio. I mean, I was at the Arsenal game, and I thought Inter were magnificent. Jan Bisek produced one of the best individual performances I've ever seen. And he had all that strapping. He was on his chest. He was wearing, he was taking painkillers. I think if Inter can defend like that, and you need a bit of luck doing that, but there's no reason why Inter can't defend that way. The problem is you need to park your pride, and you need to say, I'm willing to play a deeper line. I'm willing to try and play more in transition. And it could work, to be honest, if you just let the opposition have the ball. The important thing is Inter don't try and beat Barcelona at their own game. That was the great triumph at 2010. It was Mourinho saying, I'm going to play literally the opposite brand of football to you, and I'm going to show you that I'm superior to you and I'm going to beat you. Now, Inter don't have Jose Mourinho. They don't have some of those players from the treble-winning season, but what they do have is some world-class players, and you mentioned them already.
Yeah,
they do. Bastoni, Barella, Çalhanoğlu, Lautaro Martinez, and Thuram if fit.
Absolutely. And look, you mentioned the 2010 Camp Nou famous victory, and that's what Inter fans like to return to. And of course, because that was a very positive and legendary win, and Busquets with the peekaboo, Thiago Motta getting sent off.
Well, technically, it was a defeat. It was the most glorious defeat of Inter history, wasn't it?
Yeah, glorious, most glorious.
Yes,
1-0, and Mourinho going up to Guardiola when he's talking to Ibrahimovic. If I ever interviewed Mourinho, I will pressure him to say what he said there, because I've heard some really interesting stories that some lip reader I saw say that what Mourinho told Guardiola in that situation is that you could stand here and try to explain to him to next week, he'll still not understand what you mean. If I hope to God that is what he said, because it would end me hilariously. But I'm fearing this La Settimana Maledetta of Leonardo a year later. That's what the last week has been telling me. The loss to Bologna, the 3-0 hammering by Milan, and of course the Champions League with Barcelona now after losing to Roma. Now the La Settimana Maledetta of Leonardo was when Inter, after Rafa Benitez has been sacked, Leonardo comes in, he turns everything around, he unleashes the attacking prowess of Inter following the treble. They make up for most of the what they've been away in the league. They're within, I think, 3 points of Milan going into the derby in the league. They get hammered 3-0 because Leonardo doesn't believe in defending in his 4-2 Fantasia. and they get hammered at home to Schalke 04 2-5 at the San Siro. That was the settimana maledetta, the cursed week. Well, this has been a cursed week for Inter as well, and we'll know, I think, on Wednesday night whether we are talking 2010 or if we're talking 2011, if we're talking about history and Inter goes. Right, I know you have to run. Just quickly before we go, we were gonna. There were some questions sent in for you because we're gonna have you on the Q&A originally, but then we had to reschedule. I promise we'll have Patrick back soon again to do a Q&A once time and availability is permitting.
Provided you can afford my fee.
Well, yeah, so we need. That's why people need to subscribe to the Patreon more, exactly, so we can afford to bring Patrick back. So patreon.com/TIFP. But before we go, let's end with Baggio, Premface, and Serie AS of the week. So the Premface, the Baggio of the week. Starting off with that, have you got a Baggio that you've seen this week that you think deserves?
I think Scott McTominay is the standout for me, really. 5 goals in 3 games. You know, the winner at Monza when Napoli were awful. 2 against Empoli. You know, Napoli have started to win games, and he started to step up and to score 2 identical goals against Torino. I mean, to do it once, okay, you catch them off guard. They'd have known he was going to do that. He just seems to be that bit quicker, that bit more intelligent. He seems to read the game better than opposition players. And he's now gone beyond Dennis Law. Had a better single season in Serie A than Dennis Law. Is one of the greats of all time. So I think on that basis, Scott McTominay, and I just saw an interview that he did post-match yesterday with all the various nicknames he's now been given by the Napoli fan base, and they asked him to choose which one his favourite one was, and he went for McFratima. Fratima is my brother, basically, Fratima. So McFratima is now what he's being dubbed.
I'm addicted to how the Neapolitans pronounce his name. Scotta McTominay is just I'm addicted to it, and I'm wondering when they're going to do that classical Neapolitan thing of Scott. Like, when are they going to put the
I don't know. Maybe it's been and gone, to be honest. I'm not sure.
Scotta McTominay.
Yeah. I'd quite like to see what pizza they name after him as well, what the ingredients would be.
That's going to be awesome.
Haggis, but there we go.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant. Right, and next, for me, Baggio of the week is either McTominay, but also Roma. I think what they're doing is unbelievable, and Ranieri and Soule, of course, as well. But Roma and Ranieri has to be, what they're doing is just genuinely unbelievable. As for Premface, so I've got one here which I think is hilarious. Former Barcelona and current Chelsea female player Kira Walsh was playing England or Spain game, and she chose England for Food Fashion League. And using like cricket and stadiums and sense of humor. She only chose Spain for weather and language, but she says she can't speak Spanish, which I think is just
sounds nice. That doesn't it? Sounds nice. Yeah.
It sounds nice. Yeah. I thought that's brilliant. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. Which made me laugh. Have you got a Premface?
Nothing really that comes to mind, not unless there's been some outlandish statement about Virgil van Dijk, but I think that's been there and done it. But he's definitely cemented his place.
I saw a clip. I don't know how old it is.
Yeah.
I saw a clip which I haven't shared with you. It's Robbie Keane on Rio Ferdinand's podcast, and Rio Ferdinand's talking about how when he was a defender, when he played against Milan, he was up against Inzaghi, Shevchenko, Kaká. When he played Juve, he had Trezeguet, Del Piero. And he's talking about how there's no real world-class attackers nowadays compared to back then, which I think is a good point. Robbie Keane gets on there and mentions himself as one of the greats of them, which I was like, no, I'm sorry. I just thought of that meme, like of who let a polar bear in Arlington, Texas? Like, you don't belong there. Like, compared to I thought that was absolutely brilliant. So probably the first Irishman we've had as a Premface of the week, Robbie Keane. I don't know how old that is.
Into legend, Robbie Keane.
No, God. Yeah. So as for the Serie ASS of the week, Claudio Lotito's hat-trick in the Italian Senate. Have you seen this?
No,
it is gold. He's sleeping Okay. And then the phone rings, he answers it, talks in it, and then goes back to sleep.
Ah, dear. Yeah, Italians and politics.
Claudio Lotito is just this never-ending, like.
Was he wearing his iconic headwear, or was he?
I think there was something that, like,
his broad.
Yeah, he was in the Senate. There's deliberations going on, and he's sleeping, and then the phone rings. He answers it, and goes off, dozes off.
I mean, I've been commentating on Lazio games before, and they've cut to him in the stands, and he's been sleeping there. And you just try and change the subject, or you say something a little bit pithy, like clearly this Lazio performance, it's not exactly entertaining the boss or something like that, But
Claudio Lotito is a funny character. Right, that's all the time we had time for this week. Unfortunately, as we said, we're not going to have a Q&A this week. Carlo's doing a post-match reaction on Wednesday to the Barcelona game. We'll be back for patrons next week. We'll be doing the Q&A next week, so all your questions will be safe. We'll add them to next week, and we'll hope to have Patrick on soon again for a Q&A at some point. Patrick, if people want to follow you on social media, and if you've got something you want to plug, by all means, the floor is yours.
Yeah, Twitter is my social media of choice. X, if you prefer, at Patrick Kendrick, but with 1K. So it's a bit like Patrick and then the Real Madrid player.
Endrick.
Endrick. Yeah, there you go. Patrick.
Thank you so much for stepping in, Patrick. Really appreciate it. It's been a long episode. I really appreciate you giving up so much of your time to do this. Everyone else, please, if you want to, as I said, we'll be back later in the week for patrons only. It's a review of the Inter Barcelona game. We'll do an extra long Q&A next week. And of course, for everyone else, we'll be back on Monday for a full review of the weekend's action. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Ciao, ciao.